Hello out there in Videoland. Mimi is reading another book, and it's called The Ugly Duckling by Hans Christian Andersen. He was very famous, and he used to write all kinds of tales, but he lived a long, long time ago and doesn't live any longer. He's gone. So this says, once upon a time, beside a beautiful lake, a mother duck was sitting on a nest full of eggs. Every day she said, quack, quack. I wonder when my baby ducklings will come out of their shell. Finally, one day she heard a cracking sound coming from one of the eggs, and soon she heard a beep, beep. When she looked under her wing, there was a new baby duckling. With each new crack and peep, another duckling was hatched. Mother Duck admired her babies and said proudly to herself, "My, how beautiful they are." Look at them, they're cracking out of their shells. Owen and Kenna and Cole have ducklings too. So I'm sure that that's kind of fun. After a while, all the eggs had hatched except one. This egg was very large and did not look like the others. Mother Duck looked at this last egg and said, "Quack, quack. What's the matter with you? Why don't you crack and peep like the rest?" Mother Duckling was becoming quite uncomfortable sitting on this huge egg day after day. She was beginning to lose her patience. Then one day, while she was sitting there, an old duck friend came to visit. "How are you doing?" asked her friend. "Not very well," Mother Duck answered. "I don't know why this last egg will not hatch." "I'll bet it's a turkey egg," said the old duck. "Don't bother sitting on it any longer." But even though she was becoming very tired, Mother Duck decided to sit on the last egg for just a little bit longer. And it's lucky that she did, for soon she heard a loud crack and then a loud peep. When Mother Duck lifted her tired wing, she saw a large, gray, ugly duckling tumbling out of the big egg. "I have never seen anything quite so ugly and gray," Mother Duck exclaimed. "Maybe it is a turkey chick after all." Do you suppose that's what it is? Let's see. A hen nearby clucked and asked the same question. "What is that ugly thing?" And a cat stared at the duckling and meowed. "Where did that come from?" Even the cow tried to poke the poor bird with her horns as he waddled by. Mother Duck quacked angrily at them all. "Leave him alone," she shouted. "Good looks are not that important, you know." She knew he was a good duckling, and she loved him, even if everybody else considered him ugly. Day after day, the ugly duckling had to put up with being teased and picked at. All the other animals poked him and made fun of him. The poor duckling felt more miserable all the time. Finally, one day, the ugly duckling had had enough. He said to himself, "I don't belong here anymore." And with big tears in his eyes, he decided to fly away. He didn't even say goodbye to Mother Duck and his sisters and brothers. He just left. As he was flying away, teardrops fell from his eyes into the lake below. The tears were so big that they made great ripples in the water. The ugly duckling felt very sad indeed. Boy, he does look a lot different than the other chicks. There he goes, flying off. After flying a short while, the ugly duckling came upon a big marsh beside a small pond. "This looks like a good place to spend the night," he said sadly as he flew down into the tall marsh reeds. "No one can pick on me here," and no one did. But the night was long and lonely for the little duckling as he thought about his family, whom he missed very much. When the sun began to rise the next morning, the ugly duckling heard a soft rustle sound in the tall reeds. Suddenly he found himself face to face with several wild ducks. "You certainly are ugly," the wild duck said, "but we don't care. In fact, we like you." They added. The ugly duckling didn't know what to think, but slowly he started feeling better. Then, just as the ugly duckling began to feel a little less frightened and a little less sad, he heard a loud noise from the marsh. "What was that?" he asked. "The hunters with their guns and dogs are here," said the wild ducks. "We must go." Quickly they rose from the pond and flew away, leaving the ugly duckling behind. Once again, big tears came to his eyes. He was more frightened than ever. Oh, he looks different than the wild ducks. As the poor duckling watched the wild ducks fly away, a large black dog came dashing towards him. The duckling was so terrified that his feathers were shaking. But after sniffing that ugly duckling, the big dog just turned his head and trotted away. The duckling muttered to himself, "I'm so awful looking that even the hunting dog doesn't want me." Because the ugly duckling was afraid to move, he stayed hidden in the tall reeds for a long time. Finally, when the shooting stopped, he hurried as fast as he could away from the marsh. He was trembling so hard that he could not fly. So he ran across meadows and fields until he didn't think he could run any more. By night time, the ugly duckling was so tired he decided he had to stop for a rest. He collapsed in the tall weeds beside an old run-down cottage. As he snuggled in the weeds, the wind began to howl, and he had to set on his wings to keep from blowing away. The wind blew harder and harder. With each new gust, the shaky chimney on top of the cottage appeared to lean a little further to one side. The door on the house creaked and the windows rattled. Oh, I bet he was scared with all those noises. There's the big dog. And there is the old run-down cottage. Suddenly, the ugly duckling noticed that one of the rusty hinges on the door had broken loose. As he quietly waddled a little closer to the door, he spotted a small crack on one side of it. He decided this was just about wide enough for him to squeeze through. So that's exactly what he did. He was very curious to see what was inside. When he peeked in, he saw an old woman sitting there with a hen and a dog. She was stroking the cat. She sat there with a hen and a cat. Mimi can't read cat and dog. Whoops. She stroked the cat gently, and the cat was purring contentedly. The hen pecked quietly around the table where the old woman was sitting. The ugly duckling could tell that the woman loved the cat and the hen very much. Suddenly, the old woman looked up and blinked at the ugly duckling. In a soft voice, she said, "My, what a nice, fat, handsome duck you are." The ugly duckling could tell that the old woman couldn't see very well. Then she murmured, "Why don't you stay for a while so I can have duck eggs for breakfast?" The ugly duckling was very pleased at her invitation and decided to accept. He finally felt loved. At first, he was quite comfortable in his new home, but as the days went by, the ugly duckling discovered that the old woman's cat was the master of the house, and the hen was there's the old lady and the hen and the cat. The hen was the mistress. They could do no wrong, and both thought highly of themselves. They began to look down on the ugly duckling because he was not very useful. Even the old woman began to lose patience with him. Each morning she would look to see if any duck eggs had arrived, and each morning there were none. "What's the matter with you?" she said angrily to the ugly duckling. The hen clucked angrily too. "What good are you?" she asked. "You can't even lay eggs." And the cat meowed loudly. "Why can't you purr and arch your back the way I do?" The ugly duckling began to feel very sad once more. All he could think of was floating and gliding on the pond at home. Finally, one day, he said to the hen and the cat, "You just don't understand me. I love to swim and dive and feel the water close to my body." The hen and the cat replied, "You've lost your mind. What a silly idea to swim and dive and get your head wet all the time. Now you just purr and be clever like us." She's not very happy with him. No eggs. He's very sad. One evening, in the cool, crisp air, a brilliant sunset appeared with its large flock of beautiful white birds. The ugly duckling had never seen such lovely birds before. They were swans, showing off their long, graceful necks. As they flew above him, they made an unusual crying noise. A strange feeling came over the ugly duckling as he watched the swans soar higher and higher into the air. Turning and circling in the water, he became excited and began to turn somersaults. As the little duckling stretched his neck in their direction, he suddenly let out a sharp, strange honk. He had never heard himself make such a noise before. He even scared himself. But those beautiful birds were like magic to him. They made him feel happy and warm inside. He was so joyful that he dove right down to the bottom of the pond and up again with great speed. A deep feeling of love for the birds came over him, a feeling he had never felt before. He continued to watch them fly away in the direction of the sunny lands and warm lakes. The ugly duckling had no idea where they had come from or where they were going. He only knew that they were dearer to him than anything he had ever known. Look at them, flying in the sky, and how big they are. They look a lot alike. The winter that followed was bitterly cold. Every day the ugly duckling would swim harder and harder, trying to keep from freezing. He could hear the sound of the ice snapping and cracking close to him as he tried to keep his feet moving. Little by little, the spot he was swimming in grew smaller and smaller, and he had to keep moving even faster to prevent the ice from closing in on him. Then at last he was so thrilled and so tired, he grew faint from exhaustion and laid very still. He was stuck fast to the ice. Oh no. The next day, a farmer came trudging by and saw the frozen duckling. He used his heavy black boots to break the ice and lifted the shivering bird up in his arms. He carefully carried him home to his wife and children. They cared for him and before too long the ugly duckling felt quite warm and comfortable. The children were happy to have a new pet, and naturally they wanted to play with him, but the ugly duckling was frightened, thinking they would want to hurt him. Look at the little spot in the ice. And there the farmer carries him home. Oh, I'm glad he's safe. They wanted to hurt him, and so he tried to fly away. Alas, he did not get very far. He flew right into the milk pail and splashed milk all around the room. From there he flew to the butter tub and then into the flour bin. What a mess he was making! The children laughed and laughed as they shouted, "You're such a funny duckling." The farmer's wife, however, didn't think he was so funny. She screamed and waved her chubby arms in the air. "I'll get you," she yelled. With that, she grabbed a stick from the woodpile and chased the ugly duckling around the room. Giggling and laughing, the children fell all over one another with delight. But just as the ugly duckling was about to be hit with a stick, he noticed a small crack in the kitchen door. "If I only can escape through this tiny crack," he thought to himself, "I'll be safe outside, where they can't get me." So he flew towards the crack and just barely squeezed through. He landed in the snow-covered bushes beside the house, but he was in such a daze that he laid there for a long time after. When at last he felt it was safe to leave, he quietly wandered back to the tall, frozen marsh reeds around the pond. From that day until the end of the cold winter, there was nothing but more misery for the poor little creature. Boy, what a mess he made, and she was not very happy. The ugly duckling was so busy trying to survive the harsh winter that he didn't notice that the sun was growing warmer and the birds were beginning to sing as they returned to the marsh. The frozen grass began to thaw and the ice on the pond gradually melted. Small buds appeared on the trees in the nearby woods, and soon flowers began to poke their heads up in the meadow. Spring was coming at last, just like it is now. One day the ugly duckling decided it was time to try his wings. At first they made a slight whirling sound as he moved them back and forth. But then, to his surprise, they soon were carrying him swiftly into the air. He felt very proud of himself. "How strong I have become," he thought happily. Before he knew what was happening, he found himself flying over a beautiful garden. Scents of apple blossoms and roses filled the air. Fresh young green leaves were on all the trees, and the lilacs reached out over the lovely pond. Spring is certainly a wonderful time of year, the ugly duckling thought to himself. Oh, things are getting... Look at the birds and the butterflies are coming back. And there he is, flying high in the sky. And everything looks little from the sky. Suddenly he spotted 3 elegant swans on the pond, floating gracefully over the water. The swans began to ruffle their feathers. The ugly duckling happily recognized the beautiful birds, but then a feeling of sadness came over him. "What majestic birds," he whispered to himself. "Oh, how I want to fly over and join them. But I know they will say I am ugly. Still, I guess I'd rather be hurt by them than constantly be nipped and pecked by all the other animals." So the ugly duckling flew over towards the swans and settled on the water. When those gorgeous birds saw him, they began to swim in his direction. The ugly duckling was sure that they would be the end of his life, so he bowed his head towards the water. As he lowered his head, he saw his own reflection in the clear, sparkling surface. "Who's that?" he exclaimed in great surprise. for he saw that he was no longer a gray, ugly duckling. He had become a beautiful white swan. How exciting and happy he was. There he's flying over to meet them. And look, see what he looks like. Isn't that lovely? The 3 elegant swans swam gracefully to him, but instead of pecking and nipping at him, they stroked him gently with their white, fluffy wings. The duckling was overwhelmed. He couldn't believe what was happening to him. With a feeling of great joy, he proudly lifted his handsome head high in the air. As he looked up, some little children came skipping into the garden near the pond. They threw pieces of biscuits in the water for the swans to eat. The duckling heard one of them shout, "Look, there's a new swan over there, and he's the loveliest one of all." The children clapped their hands in delight as the other swans bowed to their new family member. The once ugly duckling shyly tucked his head under one of his wings. He was so filled with happiness that he didn't know what else to do. It seemed so new and strange to him to be called the loveliest bird of all. What a wonderful feeling it was to be loved after being teased and disliked for so long. As he thought about the new joy he had found, he started feeling glad about all the hard times and sadness he had suffered. It made him appreciate the new happiness and beauty he now enjoyed. Oh, look at the kids. They've noticed him. And look, they're throwing the bread in the water. Isn't that nice? As he swam by the other swans around the pond, the apple blossoms seemed to smile at him. The rose in the garden seemed to open their buds wider as he glided towards them. He raised his head and softly murmured to himself, "When I was an ugly duckling, I never dreamed I could ever be this happy." Isn't he beautiful? That was a pretty nice story. You never know what people are going to be when they get bigger.